Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Since the start of the Arab Spring, there have been hopes of change and the creation of a better future. Sadly, this has not been the case. Libya, bombed to democracy by NATO, is breaking up and on the verge of a civil war. In Syria, the civil war has ground down into stalemate. Partition is the likely outcome. It would appear the only winners are the forces backing instability. To crosstalk the evolving Middle East, I'm joined by my guest, Kapil Kamareddy in London. He is a writer and a journalist. In New York, we have Michael Kelly. He is a defense reporter for the Business Insider. And in Colombia, we cross to Joseph Olmert. He is a Middle East expert currently at the University of South Carolina. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Kapil, if I can go to you first in London. It's not getting a lot of media coverage in the West, but it looks like Libya is falling into another war, a civil war this time. On top of that, we're told the Pentagon wants to train about 8,000 Libyans in a NATO country. So can you explain to me, why did NATO have to destroy the country and now it has to train its security forces?
Well, from an American perspective, the invasion, the overthrow of Gaddafi was intervention light, and now I think the decision to train Libyans is too late, too little. There are simultaneous uprisings erupting all over Libya, and the government doesn't know whether it has to govern or suppress these uprisings. So it's a mess in Libya.
Okay, well, so, Kapil, if I can stay with you, what's the next step? Is there a civil war on the horizon?
We can't tell right now. I mean, there are signs of a civil war already, but okay. To what extent it will dissolve, the state will dissolve, it's not clear yet. Whether the American decision to intervene and to train the Libyans, what kind of an effect that will have on the ground is yet to be seen. But it's a little too late.
Okay,
right now.
Or maybe a little too early here. Joseph, I can go to you. In Colombia, I mean, it looks like right now that Libya is a failed state. I mean, so what do? I mean, you train 8,000 troops whose loyalty is very unclear, because loyalties in Libya itself is very unclear, and when the country is breaking up into 3 discrete parts right now. So what is 8,000 troops going to do to salvage the situation in Libya?
Well, I think that they will not do anything good, and I agree with you completely. And, you know, I was very skeptical to start with about why there should have been any intervention from the outside in Libya. But, you know, I mean, let's be honest about that. It's easier said than done. If you are not Libyan, you are outside of Libya. I really believe that the Gaddafi regime, as obnoxious as it was, gave some stability to Libya, or at least it seemed like that. And what happened in Libya could have been handled in a different way. But look, it happened already, and now we talk about the next stage. I agree with you. We are in a civil war. If that's what Kapil said, he's absolutely right about that. The extent of civil wars is not to be measured necessarily by the number of casualties, but by the fact that there is a problem that cannot be resolved politically, and people kill each other. And of course, it started now with tens of people. It will go on to hundreds and maybe thousands, God forbid. Hopefully not, but that's the way it started in Syria, a country that we shall talk about later.
Yes.
I don't believe that the Americans are in for anything good there in Libya, and if anyone asks for my advice, I would tell them not to do anything. But, you know, Peter, they don't ask for your advice or my advice.
That's for sure. Michael, if I can go to you, I think I do have a good indicator where this country is going, and we look at the number of militias. At the height of the forced overthrow of Gaddafi, there were about 50,000 members of militias. Now there are 250,000, and the country's awash with arms. I mean, what in the world is going to happen next year? This is one of the most dangerous countries in the world, and we'll talk about Syria in the next part of the program. I mean, this is a culmination of just everything that could go wrong, has gone wrong for this country, and the spillover effect for the region is beginning to be felt.
Yeah, it's a real issue, and it's going to continue to fracture. I mean, you see normal, nonviolent protesters in Tripoli yesterday and continuing today, telling the government to do something about all of these militiamen that are surrounding the city and being used for political means on all sides. It looks like it's going to get worse before it gets better, definitely.
Kapil, but I mean, we heard that I think you started out with intervention light, humanitarian intervention light. I mean, this is turning into something far more than that. NATO broke the country through its bombing, and it has left no infrastructure whatsoever for the country to govern itself. And it's only a matter of time before we're going to see blowback here. There's just too many arms, too many people with different loyalties, and we have a government that can't rule the country. And you know what? There's a lot of oil there, so I suppose it will get attention.
Well, what happened? There were no independent institutions in Libya to begin with. It was owned by a family. It was owned and run by Gaddafi. But he brought an element of stability to the country. When he was removed, NATO had a responsibility to go in and build institutions to assist the country in rebuilding itself. It
Kapil,
didn't do that. They just
do you
wanted
think
to
that
get
that was ever considered?
Gaddafi out.
Do you think that was ever considered? Because as you pointed out, I'm using your words, intervention light. No, we just go in a little bit and the place will take care of itself. It'll be a walk in the park, if I can quote the Vice President Cheney when he talked about Iraq. I mean, this is something that is not thought about, okay? And if you break it, you own it, don't you think?
No, it's not. That's absolutely right, and this is the idea of going and doing something and feeling good about it. But building nations, nation building takes years and years and years, and that requires treasure and blood. And I don't think any of the NATO nations were interested in sending their money or their troops.
Okay.
Or even sending the expertise to rebuild the country. Now they want to train 8,000 troops, and it's come so late. It's almost a surgery to the wounds.
You know, Joseph, one of the issues here is we have these militias. Some of them are fanatically religious Islamic groups, and they are going to be exporting. Not only are they spreading it in the country itself, they're exporting it abroad. And when we look at Mali and the connection with what's going on in Syria as well, I mean, this is something, again, you know, the law of unintended consequences. It's a death spiral when you think about it.
Well, Peter, I agree with you completely. I mean, this intervention from the outside in Libya was not thought out very carefully and with a view to the future by those who intervened. And they wanted to have short-term profits and benefits, and the word profit is in place here because when you look, for example, at the role of, say, France, French companies has done a lot of good to themselves since then, not just in Libya, but in neighboring countries. And you can look also at the French intervention in Mali in the context of what happened in Libya, an attempt by two different French presidents, by the way, Sarkozy and now Hollande, to show that France has its own interests and policy and all that. But look, I mean, the real problem is, and I believe that Kapil started referring to all that, is that there was nothing in Libya before Gaddafi was brought down because Gaddafi wanted Libya to have nothing other than his own regime. All this business of the Jamahiriya, you know, the popular committees and so on, it was all nonsense, of course. It was a dictatorship. And he also worked with the tribes, those who were loyal to him as opposed to others. What happens in a civil war in an Arab country like that, not dissimilar, by the way, to what happened in Lebanon in the 70s or what's happening in Syria now or in Iraq, is that when the regime breaks down for this or that reason, mainly because of the combination of external and internal factors and interventions, the loyalties go down to the most rudimentary, fundamental level of loyalty, which is the tribal, the local, the sectarian. And Libya is not an exception. And in any other country like that, or in Libya as well, there will be Islamic forces. There will be less or more fanatic like you have in Syria. And the export of these people from Libya to other countries is obvious, like it was from Afghanistan and so on. So, I mean, all these dangers are there, Peter. And right now, I can only tell you, look, the safest prediction to make about Libya is it's going to go on.
Okay, Michael, NATO went in there to save the Libyan people. How do you think the people feel now? What were they saved from?
Well, I assume they're very conflicted because in January 2011, when those protests started, it was about delayed housing units. And the month later, they were around this same police headquarters in Tripoli, just protesting the government. And now there's no state institution, there's no government, and you find these college students back out in Tripoli protesting the militias that replaced the government on the ground and have swelled to these amazing numbers, roaming territory that they've just commandeered. So I think that they're very conflicted and just devastated by the situation in their country.
Kapil, you said it earlier in the program, you said it was too late when I mentioned the training of Libyan forces by the Americans. What should the outside world do now in looking at Libya? Anything? Because sometimes doing something is worse. I would say what NATO did was far worse than what was there before. It seems to me people on the ground were reflecting that on as well. But I mean, what should the international community do now to deal with Libya, other than contain it?
Well, first of all, the outside world, when you say, I think the responsibility to restore order in Libya falls on the shoulders of the nations which brought about this calamity. And in order to restore order, they will have to do a lot more than train 8,000 people. This is again a light intervention. This is again on the cheap. It will require a lot more. It will require aid. It will require expertise. It will require bringing people to America, training them. It will require the building of institutions. It will take at least a decade to restore order in Libya. And it will be incremental. But I don't think any of the states
do you think that the United States and NATO can ever, earn any kind of respect from the Libyan people now? I mean, 10 years is a long time when you're in a civil war.
I think there are pockets of gratitude that we have to acknowledge that, but I think those are deteriorating as the security situation dissolves in Libya. And I think in order for them to earn back that gratitude, they will have to do a lot more than give speeches and train 8,000 people.
Oh, Michael, do you want to jump in right before the break?
Yeah, I agree. I think if the security situation is moderately helped or fixed, a lot of these protesters now, they want these militias out of the capital. So anything, it will take a substantive effort, but anything that people can help with expertise or simply uplifting these state institutions, the army that is decimated, would be great.
Okay, Michael, I have to jump in. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the Arab Middle East. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the evolving Arab Middle East. Okay, Joseph, we're going to switch gears here. We're going to talk about Syria right now. The Syrian National Coalition has dropped its demand that Assad must go. How significant is that for you? Because for most of the, if not all of the major opposition groups, having Assad go has always been their key point, to the point of just being obstinate in dealing with the peace plan that the Russians and the Americans have at least tried to, at least Russia has pushed very hard for. Do you see an evolution, Joseph, in the situation in Syria when it comes to the opposition, or is this national coalition group just so irrelevant now because of the rise of the fundamentalists there?
No, I don't think that it is really significant. The SNC, the Syrian National Coalition, is not important, never been important, by the way. The forces on the ground are the ones which matter, and the situation in Syria is not getting better. It's getting worse all the time. I mean, just in the last 48, 72 hours, there were all kinds of clashes and losses to both sides. One of the big rebel leaders was killed. There was a huge explosion that killed many Syrian soldiers in a suburb of Damascus, in Harasta. So you can see that all this is brewing up and continuing, and quite frankly, this peace conference, if it ever happens, will not succeed. Nothing can change the situation right now. The civil war in Syria is going to continue. And, it reminds me, I mean, I'm an old hand, if I can say so. I mean, I was monitoring the Lebanese situation and the Syrian from the 1970s and 80s and all that. Yeah, it was the first Geneva conference about Lebanon. There was the second Geneva conference about Lebanon, and nothing came out of it, because in a situation like that, where the forces opposed to each other are, it's like a fundamental clash for survival between differing forces, there has to be some kind of a decision on the ground in order to lead to a political decision. And right now, I don't think that there is going to be any real decision on the ground. It's kind of, if we borrow a term from football, it's a draw. And this draw can go on for quite some time. And so long as the draw there, I don't see any real possibility for an important, significant political breakthrough, whether it is in Geneva or any other place, whether it is a Russian or American plan. But I'll make one point about the Russians here. And if I may quote myself, because on the 28th of January of 2013, I wrote, it appeared that Russia should play a positive role about the chemical weapons, and they did. And I'm very happy about that. And the reason that I make the point here is the American administration should have been in touch with the Russians a long time ago in order to facilitate some kind of a political arrangement when it might have been working. Right now, I believe there is no real incentive for anyone to do something dramatic because Bashar Assad looks like he's winning, but he's not. The opposition may claim that, look, we control 60 or 70% of the ground, not exactly. So it's kind of a draw, and right now I'm not really optimistic about all that.
Kapil, it's very interesting what Joseph just said, because maybe Assad can't win this civil war, but it looks like he's making a lot more gains than the opposition. As a matter of fact, the more and more you read about what's going on with the rebels, is they're turning on themselves more and more often. Assad may never get all of Syria back, but he's got a good chunk of it, and he might be quite satisfied with what he has. Because, you know, I mean, when your opposition is in a circular firing squad, don't interrupt them. Just let them keep firing.
Yeah, they're killing each other, and Assad is just watching from the sidelines, and he's making significant gains in Aleppo. Today, recently, one of the major rebel leaders, Abdul Qadir Saleh, was killed. He's making gains. And the opposition, which has been making significant demands of Assad that he should step down or he should make concessions, it's actually the opposition that has been making concessions. First, they said that they will not go to attend the peace talks in Geneva. Now they say they will. And their condition for that is Assad should open up humanitarian corridors, which he is. So now they're using, now the opposition, which is riven, internally fractured, is now depending upon its patrons in Saudi Arabia to attack Assad's allies. For instance, in Lebanon today, the bombing. Syria has pointed the finger at Saudi Arabia. America wants Iran out of the peace negotiations, but really the country that is prolonging this war, that is the cause of this instability, is Saudi Arabia. Yeah. And it's absurd that Saudi Arabia is our ally in this region.
That's the irony of ironies. Michael, it's interesting that the Saudi Arabia has been mentioned, because we had Secretary Kerry say that the United States and Saudi Arabia agree on the ultimate goal. He doesn't like to say exactly what the ultimate goal is anymore, because I think Washington's been a little bit red-faced about Assad must go, because it's not going to happen. But we do see two different trajectories here. We have in the American one, which seems very blurry to me, and Saudi Arabia is just going to do whatever it damn well pleases, and it's going to continue fueling that war, irrespective of the suffering of the people of Syria or the impact on the region, because it's only looking at Iran.
Well, it is true that since August 23rd, the gassing of Ghouta, that the Americans chose not to intervene or even provide military support to the rebels anymore. And really the basis is this is a full-on, as Joseph said, it is a full-on military conflict. And so when you have Iran and Russia backing Assad and Hezbollah forces inside Syria fighting for Assad, Shia militias trained in Iran fighting for Assad, the Saudi Arabia sees this as just as serious a conflict as Iran does. And so they're going to provide military backing. Other countries are going to provide military backing to counter that. And so even
providing
with,
military assistance to it has been
Kapil,
sorry, if I may just interject. Saudi Arabia has been channeling jihadis into Syria a long time before Hezbollah entered the picture. Saudi Arabia has suppressed an uprising in Bahrain. It has funded the Azam brigades, who today launched the bomb attack on the Iranian embassy, have also launched attacks on Israel.
Well, in the same vein, Iran has been on the ground in Syria long before anyone would realize too. I mean, Russian weapons have been nonstop going there. So
Saudi Arabia funds the most
pointing the finger at countries, it's clear that it's a proxy war.
Okay, gentlemen, let me jump in here. Gentlemen, let me jump in, okay, because you're talking over each other, okay? Joseph, but what we just heard there, talking over each other, is this has turned into a proxy war. It's very patently clear here. These jihadis that are being funneled in through Saudi Arabia with Turkey's help, amazing. They're going to really regret this one day, if not already, that they've been funneling all these people, foreign nationals, into a civil war that everyone wanted to call a revolution, and now it's just a proxy war that's just taking the lives of a lot of people that do not like these foreigners in their country. I'm glad you mentioned Lebanon earlier, because this is what it's going to get down to, in my opinion, a partition. Go ahead, Joseph.
Well, you know, Peter, I mean, I find myself in a kind of funny situation as an Israeli to intervene between Iran and Saudi Arabia to decide who started what first. It doesn't matter anymore. Look, it's the sushi war, as they call it, the Sunnis and the Shias, and Lebanon and Syria have become the arenas of this war, whether it was started by the Saudis or the Iranians, it doesn't matter. I will just mention one little fact that maybe not everybody knows. One of the main sources of ideological inspiration for the early Wahhabi movement way back is the famous Syrian Ibn Taymiyyah, who is the one who issued the famous fatwa against the Alawites, you know, many years, hundreds of years ago. So the Saudis have a religious situation here, which is very obvious. They don't want to see the Syrian regime surviving with the Iranian connection and all that. But the fact of the matter is that there are two conflicts that are interconnected here. There is a Syrian civil war. The vast majority of the Syrian people, the Sunni population, they don't want Assad. They're not going to like him in the future. But there is also a proxy war. As I said before, the sushi war, and it was said by Michael before, you know, there are Shia volunteers or so from Yemen even, let alone from Iraq and all that, and of course Hezbollah, and the Saudis are sending their own people. And yeah, of course, it's going to haunt everybody else. It's going to spread. It's already spread in Tripoli. It's now in Beirut. It will go on to maybe other places. That's not good news, but this is something which is authentic because, look, it started by the Syrian people. They didn't want Bashar Assad. The Alawites were hated by the Sunnis. The Sunnis are hated by the Alawites. I mean, I'm simplifying something which may be too complicated, but that's the true story here. The sad story is that there was and still is a civil war in Syria.
I mean,
you can't ignore it.
Joseph, it started.
Kapil, go ahead.
It started as a limited but genuine people's uprising, and it was appropriated very early on by outside powers: Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. Qatar has backstepped. Turkey's almost regretting its role because it now has to deal with militants on its borders. Saudi Arabia is funding them, continuing to arm them. It thinks it has a license to destroy Syria, and its conduct is truly deplorable, and it's astonishing that no one in the West has said that Saudi Arabia should get out of the Syrian conflict.
Okay. Michael, in New York, how do you feel about that? Because
well, Kapil, you know, we don't I must say, Kapil, with all due respect, we don't have a big debate here because the only debate between us will be when did it become not just a civil war but also an external war. I agree with you. Look, it's all interconnected. But this is the Middle East. It has always been like that because, you know, the Lebanese civil war was also interconnected. So, you know, one cannot deny the fact that there is, first and foremost, there was a civil war. It's now also an external regional problem. And this war, you know, it has its deep roots in history.
Joseph, I think if we have a disagreement,
frankly,
it's only to the extent that
the perfect example of this is
I think Saudi Arabia has played a
hang on. Let's go to Michael. Let's go to Michael in New York. Go ahead, Michael. Go ahead. Jump in.
Right. The reality is you can't play the blame game on how this started, when people jumped in. I mean, you have backers on both sides and people that will benefactors on both sides. But today, that bombing in Beirut that was claimed by an al-Qaeda affiliate in Lebanon, they said in their message that they will continue attacks until Hezbollah and Iran leave Syria. I mean, that right there shows you how complicated this is and messy it is right now. It's not a matter of the blame game because that is the conflict. That is the reality on the ground, is that you have all these interconnected things, and they're interconnected within a military conflict, a sectarian military conflict that has no end in sight, really.
All right, gentlemen, we've run out of time. Fascinating discussion. Many thanks to my guests in London, New York, and Colombia. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules.
I love you.